The station hadn't seen a train in 15 years. Weeds had grown through the tracks like long fingers trying to forget what once passed through here. Passengers, freight, soldiers, dreams. Now it was all silence and rust. Jonah McCrae didn't mean to stop. His saddle was aching his hip and the sun was in his eyes, but when he passed the old depot, something, maybe instinct, maybe memory, turned his horse's head. He saw the flicker first. Not light. Not movement. Just something that didn't belong in a place so still. He dismounted, boots crunching brittle gravel, and approached with quiet dread. The air smelled like hot dust and something faintly sour, like sickness, or worse. There she was. Tied to one of the iron columns, rope cinched cruelly around her wrists and ribs, a young woman sagged, barely conscious. Her head lolled forward, hair stuck to her cheeks with dried sweat. Beside her, on the warped platform boards, two tiny girls lay curled like rag dolls, blankets stiff with filth, their mouths parted and dry. Jonah knelt. "Ma'am?" he asked, low, voice gravel-soft. The woman flinched but didn't speak. Her lips moved, cracked and blood-touched. He untied his canteen and brought it to her mouth. She sipped, coughed, then drank again. Her eyes opened. Not wild. Just empty. A widow's eyes. He'd seen them before. Seen them in his own mirror once. "Take them," she whispered. Jonah frowned, squinting past the brim of his hat. "The girls." She nodded, slow as the sun crossing sky. "They're dying." He looked down. One of the twins was shivering faintly. The other didn't move. "How long you been here?" She tried to answer. Failed. Looked at him like a woman asking to be erased. Jonah rose and pulled his knife. The rope creaked as he sliced through it, and she collapsed into his arms, feather-light but dense with despair. He held her steady, then knelt to the girls. One whimpered, a small, breathless sound that made something inside him clench. He lifted them both, cradling their tiny weight against his chest, their fevered skin burning through his shirt. He laid them across his bedroll, rolled it soft and careful. His mare shifted, sensing the burden about to be hers. The woman stirred again. "They tried to buy them off me," she rasped. "Said two pretty twins fetch a good price. I said no." Her voice cracked. Jonah said nothing. There was nothing to say yet. He hefted her next, one arm beneath her knees, the other across her back. She didn't resist. Didn't even look at him. Just folded into herself like a letter no one wanted to read. The sun was hot on his neck as he secured them both to the saddle, tying the girl's makeshift bedroll to the saddle horn. He tied the woman behind, draping his coat over her thin frame. Her dress was torn in 3 places, one shoulder bloodied, and her shoes, if she'd had any, were gone. They rode. He didn't head for town. He hadn't gone back in near 2 years, and he wouldn't start now with a stranger tied to his horse and 2 dying girls in tow. Folks would talk, assume, spit. Instead, he turned toward his land. It wasn't much, just a shack, a fence half mended, a windmill that cried when it turned, but it was his. And it was quiet. The woman slept against his back, breath barely there. The girls didn't make a sound. Jonah didn't think of what came next. He rode like he was carrying his own past behind him again. Same weight, same ache, but different shape. These weren't ghosts. Not yet. By the time they reached the edge of his property, the sun was low. The cottonwoods whispered along the creek. A crow watched from the post by the well, tilting its head like it knew more than it should. He stopped the horse by the porch and lifted the girls first, carrying them inside one by one. The cabin was dim and smelled like wood smoke and old paper. He set them on his bed, rough wool blanket, cedar frame, mattress lumpy but dry. Then he returned for the woman. She was trying to stand. "No," Jonah said simply. "I can walk," she said, though her legs shook and her knees threatened to give. Still, she made it up the steps on her own, clutching the post like it was a lifeline. Inside, she stopped at the doorway, eyes roaming the room. Stove, rocker, one small table with 2 chairs. No woman's touch. No child's toy. Just the stark absence of company. "Why'd you stop?" she asked finally. Jonah poured water into a basin. "Didn't." She blinked at him, confused. "I turned in. You were there." Silence stretched. He set the basin beside the bed and knelt to check one of the girl's pulses. Faint, but there. "They need medicine," the woman said softly. "Fever root. Marsh willow. I know some." Jonah nodded once, already moving to his shelf, pulling down the old leather-bound book with his mother's scrawled plant drawings. She'd known more about roots than she did about raising boys. He remembered watching her boil fever root tea the night his sister died, hands shaking but sure. "Name's Jonah," he said. The woman hesitated. "Mabel." He waited. "The girls are June and Mercy. Twins. 4 last month." Jonah glanced at them. "They yours alone now?" Mabel looked away. "Yes." The kettle whistled. He poured and steeped the herbs, the smell bitter and earthy. She watched him work, not with suspicion, but with something more hollow. Like she didn't know what kindness even looked like anymore. As she reached for the cup, her sleeve slid back. Jonah saw the bruises. Purple, green, yellow. Layers of someone else's rage. He didn't ask. She drank. He handed her a fresh cloth. "You can wash after they sleep." Her eyes welled, but she blinked fast. "I don't have anything left." "You got them." A long pause. "I don't know if I get to keep them," she whispered. Jonah didn't answer. Outside, the windmill creaked. A single lightning bug blinked in the window's corner. And inside that silence, one of the twins stirred and called out, hoarse and broken, "Mama!" Mabel turned so fast she almost fell. She was at the bedside in 2 steps, cradling the girl's face, whispering her name over and over. Jonah watched from the shadows, one hand on the back of a kitchen chair, as the other twin began to stir too. Soft moans, breath returning. He should have felt relief. But instead, he felt something darker, something rising like smoke. Because in that girl's eyes was a look he recognized. She'd already been somewhere she wasn't supposed to come back from. And someone had put her there. The ride began before sunrise. Jonah cinched the last saddlebag shut while the stars still clung to the sky. Mabel sat on the porch wrapped in his mother's old shawl, watching with quiet eyes. The twins, bundled tight, dozed in the hollow of a wooden crate padded with blankets and rags. Jonah had spent most of the night shaping that crate, sanding down the splinters, drilling in handles. He didn't speak of it. Neither did she. But she'd watched him through the window, one hand pressed against the glass like she couldn't decide whether to thank him or apologize. He lifted the crate carefully and fastened it to the back of the mare with thick rope. The girls stirred but didn't wake. Their cheeks were still too pale. "I can ride," Mabel said, voice still rough from the fever that had brushed her too. Jonah shook his head. "We ride quiet. You ride with me." She hesitated. "You sure?" "No," he replied. She climbed behind him without another word. They set out over the frost-bitten grass, hooves muffled by morning dew. The sky turned peach at the edges, the kind of soft light that made everything feel like it might matter again. Wind tugged at Jonah's coat, and he shifted his weight to keep them balanced. They didn't talk. Somewhere in that silence, The weight between them began to settle, not disappear, just distribute. She leaned into him when the trail tilted, and he adjusted for her without looking back. 2 shadows on the horse. A third rocking in the crate behind. By mid-morning, they passed an old fence with broken rails. A hawk circled overhead, shrieking once like a warning or a question. Jonah hadn't ridden this trail in nearly 3 years. He hadn't meant to again. But the woman behind him had changed the trail without saying a thing. He slowed the horse. "Town's another 6 miles. You still want the doctor?" Mabel hesitated. "Yes, but not the sheriff." Jonah didn't turn. "He know you." Her voice went flat. "Too well." He didn't press. Just tapped the reins, and the mare moved on. Dust lifted around them in light swirls. The sun had warmed, but the air kept a bite. Mabel's arms were wrapped around herself now, shoulders hunched. She stared out over the flat expanse like she was looking for something long gone. "They weren't born in town," she said suddenly. "We lived out near Crag Hollow. Before." She trailed off. Jonah waited. "My husband died in spring. Fever took him fast. We owed rent. I tried to stay, but the man who owned the land said he'd take it out of my hide. Told me what 2 girls would fetch down near the Colorado border." Jonah's jaw twitched. He'd heard of men like that. Had put one of them in the ground once. "So I ran," she whispered. "But not fast enough." He glanced back, brief, careful. Her face was hollowed, but the bones of something fierce still clung to her expression. Not rage. Not even grief. Just the quiet burn of someone who hadn't died, but wasn't quite alive either. "You did the right thing," he said. "I lost everything. Not them." She looked down at her hands. Around noon, they stopped by a dry creek. Jonah dismounted, stretched his back, and checked the girls. One of them, Mercy, he thought, was sweating again. He dabbed her forehead with his sleeve. The other, June, still clutched the carved toy horse. He didn't know if she'd let go since they'd left. Mabel sat beside the crate, touching their cheeks, murmuring their names. Her hands trembled. "They need water," she said. Jonah offered the last of his canteen. She stared at it. "You only brought one? Didn't expect company." She took it, raised it to her lips, then paused. Poured a little into each girl's mouth first. Then drank last. Jonah watched her do it without comment. Just packed the rest of their things and helped her back onto the horse. The trail curved now. They passed an old barn half-eaten by rot, leaning like it was trying to sleep. Jonah remembered this place, how he and his brother used to dare each other to climb the rafters. His brother had fallen once, broke a rib, and never told their pa. Just gritted through it. Jonah turned in the saddle. "You ever think about going back?" "To what?" "To what was before." She laughed. "Just once." It wasn't bitter. It was tired. Before was just quieter desperation. They didn't speak after that. When the first roofs of town came into view, Jonah felt the tension before he heard it. The air got tight. The horse slowed. Mabel leaned forward, whispering near his ear. "Someone's watching." He already knew. On the ridge above the mill road, a rider sat astride a lean gelding, rifle laid across his lap. Not aiming. Just waiting. Jonah recognized the shape. Broad chest, sloped shoulder, white hat turned to shade the eyes. Harlan West. Mabel's breath caught. "That's him." Jonah didn't blink. "You sure?" "I'd never forget the man who tried to buy my daughters." Harlan raised 2 fingers to his brim, tipping his hat slow. a mockery of respect. Jonah didn't stop the horse, didn't wave back. Just rode steady, like it didn't matter. Mabel gripped the saddle horn. "He won't try anything here," Jonah murmured. "Too many eyes. But he's not done. No." As they passed the last ridge, Harlan turned his horse and disappeared into the trees. Mabel exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for days. Jonah said nothing. When they reached the edge of town, the sign still hung crooked. Silo Ridge, Pop 143. Jonah dismounted and went to lift the girls. Mabel touched his arm. "Thank you." He looked down at her, squinting past the sun. "For what?" "For carrying ghosts without asking if they'd follow you." He paused. "They're not ghosts yet." Then he nodded toward the clinic at the far end of the street. "Doctor's in. Let's get 'em seen." But as they turned the corner near the blacksmith's, Jonah saw the curtain flick in Miss Tally's window. Then a man standing outside the general store stepped back in with a mutter. The gossip moved faster than wildfire in dry wheat. And from somewhere deeper in town, a church bell rang once. Not for time. Not for sermon. Just warning. Jonah felt it deep in his bones. The past was catching up. And it had more than Harlan's face. The first thing Mabel noticed as they stepped into Silo Ridge was how folks looked without looking. Heads turned just enough to catch her outline, then shifted like they hadn't. Curtains twitched. A woman crossed the street without glancing. No one said her name, but no one needed to. The girls were asleep in Jonah's arms, both of them bundled in faded quilts he'd borrowed from the saddlebag. Mercy's hand curled around his collar. June's cheek pressed to his shoulder, still burning faintly from fever. Mabel walked beside him, shoulders drawn in, shawl cinched around her elbows, eyes down. Her boots, borrowed too, didn't quite fit. Jonah's silence hadn't changed since the trail. But now, it felt heavier. Measured. Like every step forward was a choice. The clinic sat behind the general store, just past the trough and a row of tobacco planters. The wooden sign above the door had faded, but the name still etched through like it meant something. Drive S. J. Latimer. Jonah knocked once, then opened the door without waiting. Inside, it smelled of sage oil and something sharper, alcohol or memory. The room was cool, shaded from the midday sun by drawn curtains. Dr. Latimer, a tall man with spectacles low on his nose and a widow's peak of gray hair, looked up from his desk. His eyes settled on Mabel. Then the twins. "You're 3 years late for the plague, McCrae," the doctor said, rising. Jonah didn't smile. "Need you to look at the girls." Latimer's tone shifted at once. "Set them on the cot." He checked them gently. Measured pulse, breath, eyes. Asked Mabel a few questions in a tone too clinical to be kind, but not cruel either. She answered without embellishment, just the facts, like they were names on tombstones. After 20 minutes, the doctor nodded toward the door. Jonah followed him out. "They'll live," Latimer said. "Fevers like that don't kill unless you let him. They're lucky they're small. Bodies rebound." Jonah let out a long breath through his nose. "But the mother," Latimer added, "she's another story. She's sick. No, not in the lungs, not in the blood. But she's worn thin, like someone's been peeling her away, slow. I don't know how much she's got left to give." Jonah stared at the floorboards. "You brought ghosts back with you," Latimer said after a pause. "Town remembers." "I didn't ask it to." Latimer shrugged. "Town doesn't care." Mabel stayed inside the clinic until dusk, watching over her daughters, refusing the tea the nurse offered. Jonah waited outside on the porch, one boot tapping faintly against the wood. The streets were starting to cool, but the looks hadn't. He felt them in his skin. When Mabel finally stepped out, the air between them had changed. She looked steadier. Or maybe just resigned. "They'll need rest," she said. "You'll stay at my place." She hesitated. "You sure that's wise?" "No." They mounted up in silence. As they passed the saloon, a drunk called out from the steps. "Hey, McCrae, got yourself a new one, huh? Hope this one don't run off too." Jonah didn't flinch, didn't speak. Mabel saw his jaw set like stone, the reins pulled tighter. She looked at him sideways. "They don't forget, do they? Not when it makes them feel better." She didn't ask what they meant. She didn't need to. By the time they reached the ranch again, the sky had turned lavender. Mabel helped lay the girls back in bed, then stood in the corner of the room with her arms folded, breathing like the walls were too tight. Jonah brought her a bowl of stew. She didn't touch it. "You didn't ask me who I was before all this," she said finally. "You didn't ask me either." She looked up at him. "I was a schoolteacher. One-room cabin outside Crag Hollow. I wore blue dresses and had calluses from chalk. My husband was a good man. He whittled me a piano out of scrap wood just so I could pretend I still heard music." Jonah leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "What happened?" "He got sick. I got sold. Not with ink. Not with papers. Just with pressure." Her voice cracked. "They said, you can't afford to keep both girls. Just one. The other'll live better elsewhere." Jonah looked at the twins. "You didn't pick. I tried to run. They caught us near the station. Tied me. Took our food. Said they'd be back for the girls when they sold my name." She swallowed hard. "I prayed someone would find us. But I didn't think it'd be someone who already looked like he'd lost everything." Jonah didn't move. The windmill groaned outside. The horses snorted in their pen. Mabel shifted her weight. "Why'd you really stop at the station?" "Didn't," he said. "My horse did." She smiled, barely. "You talk like you're made of old fence wire." "I used to be louder. It didn't help." She turned her face toward the fire. "I didn't cry when they tied me up. I cried when you cut the rope." That silenced him. She didn't wait for comfort. Just walked to the wash basin and dipped the cloth in, wiping the sweat from Mercy's neck. June murmured in her sleep. Later that night, Jonah walked to the barn. He stared at the half-fixed plow, the missing hinges on the door. The brokenness he'd been living in didn't look so quiet anymore. He heard a sound behind him. Mabel, barefoot, shawl drawn tight. "You don't need to do more," she said. "I didn't say I would. You already are." She handed him a folded piece of cloth. His old bandana. Cleaned. "I washed it. Thought it might want a second life." He looked at her for a long time. Behind her, the moon broke through the clouds. Pale light washed across her cheekbones, hollow but strong. There was something about the way she stood there, like someone who had nothing, offering everything. He took the bandana. She turned to go, then paused. "Jonah." "Yeah. I think he's coming back." His grip tightened. "Harlan. He doesn't like losing. And he doesn't like witnesses." Jonah didn't answer. She looked at him once more, then slipped back toward the house, her silhouette small in the night. Jonah stayed in the barn, the wind slipping through the cracks like old breath. He stared at the plow, then at the path she'd walked. And for the first time in years, he wondered if something broken could still grow. The fever came back with the wind. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the cottonwoods and the windmill cried its tired tune, Mercy began to tremble. It started with a whimper, a small sound in the dark. Mabel was at her side in seconds, cloth to her daughter's brow, whispering half-sung words from long ago. Jonah stood in the doorway, arms folded, hat in hand. His face didn't change, but the way he leaned forward said more than worry ever could. "She was better this morning," Mabel said, voice thin. Jonah stepped in. "Sometimes fever lies." The girl's skin was slick with sweat. Her breathing, ragged. June curled beside her, still asleep, but restless now, small fingers twitching like she was chasing something in a dream. Mabel looked down at both girls, then up at Jonah. For the first time since the station, her face broke. "I can't lose them," she whispered. "You won't. You don't know that. I know enough." He knelt beside the bed and pressed the back of his hand to Mercy's neck. Then he stood, pulled a tin box from a high shelf, and dumped its contents into a bowl. Herbs, shavings, dried flowers. He worked in silence, measuring by memory. He lit the fire low and poured water into the kettle. The whole room filled with scent, bitter, sharp, healing. Mabel watched him. "Your ma teach you?" She tried. I remembered the useful parts. She brushed her daughter's hair back. "She teach you how to carry 3 broken souls at once?" Jonah stirred the brew. "No. That part I'm figuring out." Mercy cried out in her sleep. Mabel leaned over and sang under her breath, a lullaby with no words, just a hum that sounded like rocking chairs and late summer fields. The kettle hissed. Jonah poured 2 mugs and brought one over. Mabel took it without thanks, because this wasn't kindness. This was war. And both of them were already wounded. They sat like that for an hour. Jonah holding a cloth to Mercy's forehead. Mabel watching the door like she expected a devil to walk in. When the fever didn't break by midnight, Jonah moved to stoke the fire, then stood in the corner with his hands in his pockets, shoulders tight. Outside, the coyotes began to yip. Not close, but near enough to stir the past. "She was born sick," Mabel said suddenly. "Smaller than June. Quieter. The doctor said she might not make it. And when she did, I swore I'd never waste a single second of her breath." Jonah looked at the child, chest rising shallow under the covers. "She's strong," he said. "She's 4, Mabel answered, tears in her throat. "She shouldn't have to be." Jonah didn't speak, just crossed the room, knelt again, and without asking, lifted Mercy gently into his arms. Mabel froze. "What are you?" "She needs the heat. Not blankets. Skin. Arms." He sat in the rocker and held the girl against his chest, her cheek to his collarbone, her small hands limp at her sides. He rocked once. Twice. The chair creaked like a prayer. Mabel watched him from across the room, arms around herself. "I don't understand you," she said. "You don't need to." "I want to." He looked up. "I don't do this for understanding. I do it 'cause she's burning up and I got shoulders for it." The fire popped. A moth danced against the window pane. "She's not yours," Mabel whispered. He didn't look at her when he answered. "Maybe not. But tonight she's mine to hold." She covered her mouth with both hands. Minutes passed. Then an hour. And just before dawn, Mercy's breathing deepened. Her skin cooled. The flush in her cheeks began to fade like morning mist. Jonah didn't move. Neither did Mabel. They just watched her sleep, as if afraid sound alone might turn the tide again. At sunrise, Mabel brought him a fresh cloth. He nodded once, then finally laid Mercy back in bed beside her sister. They stood there for a long while, both too tired to speak. But something passed between them. Not a promise. Just presence. Jonah stepped outside. The sky had turned gold across the hills. The fence he hadn't touched in years stood jagged on the far end of the pasture. A post had fallen during last winter's storm and never been put right. He walked out there now, slow, boots heavy with the weight of the night. Found the post, half rotted at the base. He pulled it free, cut a new one from the stack by the barn, hammered it down with practiced rhythm. Each swing a thought he couldn't say. Each nail a word he'd never speak. When Mabel stepped out onto the porch, hair braided back, her hands still red from wringing cloth, she watched him finish the last strike. He didn't look up. "You fix fences when things fall apart?" she asked. He wiped his brow. "When things fall apart, something's got to hold." "You always like this?" "Only since I broke." She walked out to him, boots silent in the grass. "Harlan's coming," she said. "I feel it. Not just him. The others who think I'm something to sell. Someone told." Jonah nodded. "We can't stay." "No. But we don't have anywhere else." He looked down at her. "Yes, you do." She stared up at him, eyes full of sleep and disbelief. "You're talking about this place?" "I'm talking about this dirt. These walls. This sky. It's not much, but it doesn't ask you to bleed to stay." Mabel didn't reply, but her hand brushed his as they turned back toward the house. Not a grasp. Just a touch. Like checking if something was real. And behind them, in the softest voice, Mercy's cry rang out from the cabin. "Papa!" Jonah stopped walking. Mabel turned to him, frozen. And for the first time, Jonah McCrae didn't have an answer. Mabel didn't speak of the word Mercy had whispered. Jonah didn't either. But it hung in the rafters like smoke, unspoken, lingering, sacred. In the days that followed, neither of them dared claim it nor deny it. Mercy slept longer, drank more, held Jonah's finger when he passed by the bed, but never called him that again. Still, the seed had been planted. The weather held steady, the sky cloudless and still. But the wind felt wrong. Like something was shifting on the horizon. Jonah felt it in his bones, the way a rancher does when a storm is coming. Not by clouds, but by the silence of birds. He spent the mornings chopping wood, hammering fence rails that had waited years to be fixed. He taught June to feed the chickens, and watched her carry grain with the grave importance only a 4-year-old could muster. Mabel washed Mercy's hair with a tin basin and soft soap. She wore her pain like a veil now, thinner, more see-through, but still there. One morning, Jonah found the rag doll hanging from the porch nail, slit open down the side. Stuffing spilled like intestines, the head tilted, one eye torn off. His hand went to his side, instinct flaring, but the knife wasn't there. He hadn't worn it in days. "Someone's watching us," he said, showing the doll to Mabel. Her face went pale, but she didn't speak. By noon, he found a trail of boot prints behind the barn. Too deep to be his, too wide to be hers. He followed them past the fence line, down to the creek, where they vanished into stone. That night, he slept near the front door with his rifle across his lap. Mabel curled with the girls in his bed, the warmth of their breath like a candle against the cold. The next day, a letter came. No rider. No knock. Just paper nailed to the post by the gate. "You've got something that don't belong to you. Trade her back, or I'll take what's mine." No name. No mark. But Jonah didn't need one. He burned the note in the fire before Mabel could read it. But she knew. Her back stiffened. Her mouth drew tight. She didn't ask what it said, just packed the girls' things into a flour sack and placed it by the door. "I'll leave tonight," she said. "You won't. They'll come. Let 'em. I can't let you die for this." He stood still, then walked over and took her chin in his calloused hand, gentle like she might shatter. "You're not a burden. You're the reason I started fixing things again." She blinked hard. "I'm tired of running." "Then stop." They ate dinner in silence. Cornbread, beans, and dried peaches. The girls giggled at Jonah's bad jokes, unaware of the rope tightening outside their world. That night, just after the last lantern was out, the wind changed. Jonah heard the horse before he saw it. Just one. Not a raid, an errand. He opened the door slow and quiet. Moonlight silvered the yard. Harlan West sat on a black gelding 10 feet from the porch, one hand resting on the butt of his pistol, the other holding the reins like a man too sure of his power. "Well," Harlan said, smiling wide, "ain't this the pretty picture?" Jonah stepped down the porch. "You're trespassing. I'm reclaiming." Harlan gestured toward the house. She ran. "You sheltered. I call that stolen goods." "She's not goods. She was sold. She never agreed." Harlan shrugged. "Doesn't matter. Law don't know her name. But I do. And I got papers." "Then bring 'em." "Didn't think I'd need 'em," Harlan said, dismounting. "Didn't think the almighty Jonah McCrae would play nursemaid." Jonah didn't flinch. "You ever touch her again, you won't leave this fence line standing." Harlan laughed. "You and what law?" "No law," Jonah said, stepping closer. "Just me." Harlan reached for his pistol. Jonah was faster. The shot cracked the silence like a thunderclap. Harlan staggered backward, dropped the pistol, clutched his thigh. Blood pooled through his trousers. "You shot me," he gasped. "You reached first." Harlan cursed, eyes wide with disbelief. Jonah took another step forward, rifle steady. "You crawl back to wherever you came from. You ride with men next time. I'll bury every one of them." Harlan's teeth clenched, breath hissing. "You're gonna pay for this." "No," Jonah said quietly. "I already did. Years ago. This time, I keep what I save." Harlan limped to his horse, mounted with a groan, and disappeared into the dark. Jonah stood in the yard until he couldn't hear hooves anymore. Inside, Mabel had pulled both girls close to her chest, rocking silently, tears tracking down her cheeks. She looked up when Jonah returned, and didn't ask what happened. She saw it in his face, the price, the fire, the final line drawn. He sat beside her, resting his head against the edge of the bed. "You all right?" she asked, voice hoarse. "Now I am." "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be." She looked down at the girls. "They'll ask questions one day. Let them. And what'll we say? That sometimes a stranger becomes home. Because nobody else did." Mabel stared at him. "You don't have to carry us." Jonah looked at her, eyes steady. "I already am." The wind quieted, and in that stillness, June reached up sleepily and placed her small hand in Jonah's. No words. Just flesh, warm and willing. Outside, the stars blinked steady. A home not promised had been built, not with nails or timber, but with choices. With fire held back. With breath not wasted. With a stranger's open hand. And from the porch, the windmill turned again, its old bones creaking like a house that had decided, finally, to live. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.